Hi, everybody. Welcome to Sailors in Suits, the show with good looks and even better sailors. Today we have with us Dr. Matt Dewar, a good friend and a leader within our community here in Lake Forest. We're going to learn a lot more about Dr. Matt Dewar as we get going. First of all, Matt, how are you doing? Thanks for being with us.
I'm great. How are you, Will?
I am good. I'm good. So, Matt, first of all, you're not a sailor yet, all right, but you work with a lot of kids, and I think what you have to say is going to be very valuable to our sailing audience. You do clearly have an affinity for our lakefront and for the lake and the power of that Lake Michigan because I see you down there all the time. Talk us through, connect with us as sailors on what the lakefront means to you. Is it just a place or a space for you?
The lakefront has had a significant place or role in my life ever since I was a little kid growing up in Lake Forest. It was a place where I always could go to experience a sense of connection with myself and with the world. And it's really, as I've gotten older, and I think I've expressed this to you when we've run into each other down there, is that when you grow up at the lakefront and you're there all the time and you have access to it, you kind of take it for granted a little bit, or at least growing up. And it really hasn't been until adulthood where I've stopped and actually realized how amazing it is to have this resource so close and have this ability to just look out over water and see water stretch to the horizon and the sun rising every day above it. And now that I'm older and a little bit more of a geek, I know a lot more about the neurobiology of how vision drives our internal state and the importance of having access to a visual horizon and early morning light and the effect that has on the brain, in particular, helping us just relax and actually feel that sense of connection that I mentioned. And
So,
so
Matt,
it's
is
just,
that why I'm so chilled out all the time? Because I'm at the lake all the time?
I would say that's probably why, Will.
That's probably why. No, but so for our sailing viewers, there you have it. Matt knows why we are drawn to the lake because he is the same way. Matt, you touched on a couple things, but why don't, for those of us that don't know you, you cover a whole breadth of, let's say, arenas of wellness, well-being, education. Can you just kind of give us the full scope of what you've been up to the past couple of years, what you do for work, and then what you do additionally?
Yeah. For the last 17, 18 years, I've been at Lake Forest High School in a variety of capacities. I've been a coach, I've been a teacher, I've been a school-wide and district-wide well-being coordinator. And now my role moving forward next year is going to also be the social emotional learning instructional coach. So helping teachers in the building meaningfully integrate a heightened awareness of the social emotional well-being of their students into their curriculum and instruction. And so with that work has come the responsibility of developing a school-wide mindfulness program, because in a community like Lake Forest, that's a high performing and affluent community, the recurring need of both the adults and young adults is to learn how to relax and learn how to effectively and successfully and skillfully manage stress. And often it's our worst habits that are misguided attempts to deal with our stress. And so mindfulness has emerged as this really valuable real-time stress management tool that has really resonated with both staff, faculty, and students. So that's my day job. And then outside of school, I do a lot of consulting work with organizations of all kinds of other schools. I've worked with sports teams. You name it. I've kind of had my hands in all sorts of different projects related to well-being, mindfulness, stress management, and self-care.
So, thanks, Dr. Art. We are going to get into all of that stuff a little bit more here, but I've been friends with you for a while. My freshman year in high school, which what must have been 2005, 2006, you were a student teacher with Mr. Ferrari in English.
Yep.
Lit 1 or whatever it was. And then again, I think I had you like senior year, and then we've been family friends and good friends ever since. So I know a lot of that. We're going to get into that soon. Um, Something that's interesting for everybody who just heard what you are doing now and what responsibilities you have within the kind of community. Um, might surprise them to know that you dropped out of college and went to Korea, South Korea, to go live at a monastery. And now you're doing all of this stuff, looking very good in your suit, looking very professional. So
Appreciate
you're welcome. That's quite a journey, right? To go from that to where you are and what you're doing now. I know of some, and I imagine there were many kind of defining moments along the way, or big shifts along the way in that journey. And then, so from the beginning, are you, when you went to Korea, do you think that that was a symptom of internally everything you're interested in now? Or do you think it was actually a big catalyst for kind of what you've dedicated your life to? And then after that, lead us through how we got to now.
Great question. And I would say it's both of those things you just said. If I were to draw my life out on a timeline, I would say that there's a before and after moment. And I think going to Korea was really that pivotal, I don't want to say moment because it was 4.5 months, but pivotal time period or pivotal event that really defined who I was before and who I was after. And I think at the heart of that significance of that event in my life is I struggled with depression and anxiety as a teen, and in fact had really bad anxiety at the latter end of high school, and it really picked up in college. And so longer story shorter, I met a Zen Buddhist monk randomly, and we became friends. And so he taught me how to meditate. He got me interested in philosophy. I had been a DF student all through school. I was held back in kindergarten, and then I had to repeat my sophomore year when I transferred schools because I'd failed 3 classes.
Is this something you tell your current students, or you
Oh
keep
yeah,
secret? Yeah, good.
absolutely. And I always say to them, if someone would have told me when I was a sophomore in high school that I would grow up to be a teacher, I would have punched myself in the face. I would have thought that was the most horrible fate in the world.
Right.
And so life takes on its own way of unfolding itself. But in Korea, the real defining moment was I had in my head that I met this monk, and he said after about a year of knowing him, he's like, "You're really sincere about this." I talked to the head teacher, et cetera, in Korea, and you have open access to come to any monastery in Korea and stay for as long as you want, free of charge. You just have to get there. And so I saw this trip as like the cure for my anxiety. I thought if I go to this perfect place and some 1500, 1600-year-old monastery, and I learned to meditate and I did it all day and everything, that somehow I would rid myself of the anxiety that I had, et cetera. And so I gave up a lot of stuff. I dropped out of school. That's a whole story in itself. I literally walked out of a classroom, went down to the registrar and said, I'm out. Didn't even tell my parents, and got on a plane and with a one-way ticket to Korea. Didn't know anyone there. And so after about a week there in Korea, I opened up a journal that I brought with. And the first thing I wrote in that journal was, I traveled almost 7,000 miles, but my mind did not move.
Matt, that's really interesting. I think you and I have had a conversation, not specifically about, going to Korea before, but I was dealing with some, classic early 20s existential crisis. And I think I was talking at the time about this and that. And I was talking about going somewhere and just like leaving it. Like I was acting like my issues or the problems I was having were because of my location. And then you basically said to me in so many words what you just said to us, which is like a lot of what I was saying were my problems are not solved just by sending it out to California or something.
Yeah. And we're in a culture where we inherit a version of happiness that tells us that happiness is located outside of ourselves. And so we suffer unnecessarily because we keep pursuing something outside of ourselves, only to find that it's an empty promise. And sooner or later, well, hopefully sooner or later, but a lot of people, it's never. Sooner or later, hopefully you learn that the happiness you seek outside of yourself is actually within yourself. And so that moment and that trip to Korea was really a defining moment, because I realized that the world's a big place, but it's not big enough to escape yourself. And at some point, you have to confront your inner world, and that the real traveling, the real journey is getting to know and explore who you are on the inside.
So Matt,
sometimes,
so if I can interrupt real quick. So you realized this a week in, and you were there for what, almost 5 months? So then did you spend the rest of the time after reaching that conclusion then like looking inward?
so that was like the first moment where I started to realize I've gone to the other side of the world to find, to be different, to find something different. But I just ended up bringing what I was with me, right? You can't escape yourself. And so it started to dawn on me in that moment, but it took another 4.5 months to really hammer home the fact that, wow, I'm actually maybe even more miserable here than I was at home.
So Matt, I'm going to move us along to a question. How do you think that your interest, or what do you think the correlation is, or the lead up is, that, your first interest in teaching and education was as an English teacher? And one of the big things that you taught us a lot about, and it's interesting because we're almost going through yours, is the hero's journey. So that's what I'm kind of trying to get out of you as we go, is your hero's journey, right? But now you've definitely shifted and widened your scope, and your focus, I would say, is maybe more into wellness, right? Overall wellness and well-being, through different modes, right? So what importance did your interest in literature have, and how do you think, was it important to helping you get to where you are now and how you think?
Yeah. So the reason why I became an English teacher, let me back up a little bit. When I first came to the high school, it was only going to be a temporary job, because I had started a program in health and sports psychology. So I was looking to become a psychologist, and one of my brothers already worked at the high school, and he coached there. And so I was just looking for a job where I could do my graduate homework during the day and basically get health insurance and make some money. And so the high school was looking for someone to proctor study hall. And so my first job was to proctor study hall, and I would take attendance at the beginning of the period. And then the rest of the period, everyone would sit there quietly, and I would read my textbooks and do my work. And so in a little bit of time, I realized, wow, I really like being in a school environment. And I started coaching as well. And then I eventually just said, hey, you know what? I'm going to quit this psychology program. Even though I found it very intellectually interesting, I realized that maybe the day-to-day life of being a psychologist wasn't going to be as appealing as I thought maybe it would be. And I realized that here I was living in a school on a daily basis, and I just absolutely loved it. So I quit the program, and I went back and got certified. And the easiest route to certification was English, because as an undergrad, when I came back from Korea, I finished college and I majored in religion and philosophy as a double major. And so, and minored in English. So I'm actually the only teacher in the English department that doesn't have an English degree. I have a double major in comparative religion and philosophy. And so literature, I think, very much informs my interest in well-being, because especially philosophy, in the philosophy that I'm interested in, which is the tradition of ethics and what it means to live a good life. It's called The Good Life. It looks at the human being as a whole and the human condition as a whole. And what does it mean to be a human being? What are the unique aspects of the human condition that are shared by everyone? And that sounds like a contradiction in terms, because if it's unique and shared, right?
But there's the connection, right?
Let me finish this one point, is that I think what you see in the history of literature and philosophy is that what is most personal is most universal. And I tell this to students all the time, is that when you think that when you're struggling with something and you're going through adversity, and when you're living in an affluent community, you think that struggling with something and having difficult emotions and being imperfect are things to hide, and that it's somehow unique to you that you're imperfect. But in reality, what is most personal? That experience of imperfection and stress and anxiety is actually the most fundamentally universal thing. There hasn't been a single human being who has ever lived, who's alive now, or who will ever live, who will escape living this life without confronting imperfection and anxiety and all of those things. And so when kids realize that, and they realize that their imperfection is something to leverage as a strength, and that it makes them closer and more connected to other people, that's a really liberating moment, where you realize you don't have to hide who you are. You can embrace who you are. And when you do that, you embrace everyone. And so literature and philosophy really were catalysts in terms of allowing me to see the value of all of that.
That was a really, really well said answer. I'm not going to say anything else and tarnish it.
Dropping the mic.
Yeah. All right, let's call it. But so Matt, we're going to learn a little bit about you. We're going to rock into our Sailors in Suits rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
I'm ready, man.
All right. So I know the answer to this. Cats or dogs?
Cats or dogs?
Yep.
Dogs for sure. Sorry, cat people. Cats
Sorry, cat people. So how's Winnie liking her new friend?
Winnie, I wish I had Moose in here. I could show him off. Winnie and Moose are great. They're my two golden retrievers. Moose is a puppy we just got about 2 months ago. Winnie is actually his aunt. And so they're from the same breeder, and they're awesome. They make me laugh every day.
Right on. Yeah, you should follow Dr. Dewar's Instagram if you want to be brightened, have your day brightened up with those doggos. So, Dr. Dewar, if you had to be a professional athlete in any sport, what sport would you choose to be a pro in?
That is a phenomenal question. So, despite the fact that I'm 5'7", I was actually a really good basketball player, and I would probably say basketball. There's still this inner part of me that's mad that I never made it to the NBA.
You could have been, what was that guy's name? Muggsy Bogues. Yeah. So that's my next question is, can you still dunk a basketball on a regulation hoop?
I would be surprised if I could touch the net.
Oh, come on, man. Well, you used to be able to. So how do you start your day every morning? What's the first thing you do when you get out of bed?
First thing I do is I wake up and I simply just acknowledge the fact that I'm conscious. And I know that sounds really bizarre, but I think one of the things that we do when we wake up is we immediately default into automatic pilot. And we reach for the phone or we reach for a computer, and we just start unconsciously starting the day. And so when I wake up, the first thing I try to do is actually be fully conscious of the fact that here I am, alive, awake, and there's the sound of birds outside, and I'm in a room, and what's my internal state telling me? I'm actually kind of a weirdo, as you know, about health stuff.
Yeah.
I have a pulse oximeter right next to where I sleep. And so when I wake up, I take my resting heart rate and my blood oxygen level. And why do I do that? Because that is one of the best things you can do to see if you're stressed out or overtrained. So whether or not you've been going through an intense emotional period where you're stressed out and you're grinding and you're doing a bunch of stuff, or you've been working out a lot, or both, if you know baselines in your resting heart rate and your blood oxygen levels, when you wake up, you can see if suddenly your pulse is 5, 6, 7 beats per minute higher than what it usually is. That's a day where you really need to focus on recovery and relaxation.
So you're taking a very proactive, participatory approach to your day, starting first thing in the morning, and you're even getting data to help you guide your attention for the day.
100%.
Is that a fair summary? I like it. That's very interesting. What's your favorite class to teach?
I teach a senior philosophy course where we look at the history of Western thought, the major seminal questions that have endured through time. What is the meaning of life? What is the nature of reality? What does it mean to be a good person? How do I know that the world is real? That's the one that kids get
I bet they love it.
about.
The seniors, yeah.
Are we living in a simulation? And so first semester, we look at how Western thinkers have approached and addressed these questions. And then second semester, we look at non-Western approaches.
Right on. So this might be a weird question, but try and just give me a quick yes or no almost. The delta, the percentage of change, focusing on technology and phones in the schools, how much have kids, high school seniors, changed in your opinion from when I was a senior in 2009, 2010 to a decade later of now?
A lot. A significant amount. Just one example, when I walk into a classroom now, at the beginning of class, no one's talking.
They're just on their phones.
Yep. And you walk in, they don't acknowledge you. They don't acknowledge other people. They're completely in their own world. And
so my next question, no, it's okay. But my next question was phones in school, big problem, not a problem.
Phones in school?
Right. The cell phones being allowed in school during the school day. Are they necessary for kids to have access to throughout the day?
If I could design a school, I would design one where you wouldn't be able to bring a phone in. And a lot of the tech executives in California send their kids to no tech schools.
That's very interesting. Well, viewers, you can tell how Dr. Dewar and I feel about this. So let's see what else we have here. So Matt, you're a really busy dude. We've got you, I see you down at the lake watching the sunrise. You're always speaking to large groups, consulting, coaching, running leadership, like workshops. You seem really busy, but you're also kind of one of the most steady guys that I know. How do you prioritize your day and your time to accomplish all this, but also stay tried and true to like your personal priorities?
It's an ongoing balancing act. And that's one thing I always tell to students is perfection is never an option. You're always in the process of getting feedback from your life. Your internal environment is always changing and your external environment is always changing. And so you're always adapting. The question is what's your target? What do you want? What do you want in your life? And the more you can explain that in higher resolution and create a sketch of that, the more then you can organize how you're going to spend your limited personal resources to achieve those things. And so for me, one thing, you can see it right here on the board. Goal number 1 is this year I want to make sure that I'm doing sitting meditation for 240 hours throughout the year. And so that requires that I sit 30 to 60 minutes a day. And hopefully, or around there, at least 30 minutes, 45 minutes a day would get me to 240 hours. But then I also go on retreats and sit retreats where, you'll sit all day for 2 or 3 days straight.
So it's easier to manage your time or to prioritize it. And because the first thing you said is you pointed to your goals. So when you have a direction, that's helping you.
Correct. There's a famous quote, and it's eluding me who said it, but to the ship with no port, there is no favorable wind.
Our audience will like that.
If you don't know where you're going, there's nothing's going to help you. There's no favorable wind.
That's very, very well put.
And so for young people, I think it's really, well, anyone, but especially young adults, I think it's important to get into the habit of understanding what are the internal outcomes that you want for yourself and what are the external outcomes. And how do you know that the external outcomes that you're pursuing or want in life are going to actually give you the internal outcomes? And you really have to do some thinking and reflecting on that. And sometimes you don't know until you experience. I've had big outcomes in my life that I've pursued and sacrificed for a lot, and then I attain them. And then once I'm there, I realize, wow, this is not even giving me what I thought I wanted. And it's like, okay, note to self, right?
Right.
And so through your own experience, you'll get better at aligning external goals with internal states.
Well said. Well said. So what is the most fun part of being a parent?
Everything. I have a stepson who's 13, and he just cracks me up every day. And right now we're into this thing where we say things to each other and then we say, boom, roasted.
Yeah, we know all about that.
And so usually the day starts off with lots of boom roasted comments in the kitchen as he's eating and I'm getting ready for the day and eating as well. Nice. But I think it's just connecting and having conversations. He's philosophically inclined. So
that's helpful for you.
That's very helpful. And so we go on walks a lot. We go for hikes and stuff. And he will get into these philosophical conversations. And I'll tell him, no joke, that sometimes his level of thinking and the questions he asks are more impressive than the seniors I have. And he feels very proud of that when I said that. He's like, really? You think I'm smarter than your seniors?
You can probably tell him after this that he's smarter than the 27-year-old interviewing you. But real quick, so what does that say in those characters above your head?
So those are Chinese characters, and it's a Chinese saying that basically translated directly means I fall down 7 times, I get up 8. And so life is, speaking to that idea of it's okay to be imperfect. It's not about being perfect. It's about getting up. It's about learning. And that's resiliency. Resiliency isn't hiding your imperfection. It's acknowledging that to become who you are is to confront failure and use failure as a way of leveraging and cultivating strength. And as long as you're always getting up one more time, then you're failing, you're a success.
I like it. It's participating in the process, being active in your life.
Yep, for sure.
So Matt, we could focus a lot of the questions or this interview on so many different topics that you are very, very learned in. But I would like you to speak to, well, I saw something on your Instagram a while ago. You were giving a presentation to 300 teachers to kick off the school year. And it was basically about the importance of self-care. You said, if we want young adults to take care of themselves, we need to lead by example. So the title page of the presentation said, "A letter from my summer self," and it had a picture of the beach. All right, so we already kind of addressed your affinity to and connection to the lakefront. But I thought that was really interesting. So I really would like you to share with us and my peers on, if we want young adults to learn how to take care of themselves, that we need to take care of ourselves. So let's talk about that. But then also, I'm interested, the title of the presentation, "A Letter from My Summer Self." So maybe we talk about that title first, and then we'll dig into the taking care of ourselves so the kiddos can do the same.
Yeah. So that was actually just a part of the particular larger presentation I was giving. And I was just sharing an exercise that I started about 3 years ago, where as a teacher, I'm blessed to have summers off. And during that time, I'm really able to connect with myself, remind myself of where I've been, where I'm at, what I value, and where I want to go with my life. So it's a really good reset period. And so at the beginning of the school year, I always have this reluctance, because I know that my summer self has an expiration date, and that come November, December, January, February, my summer self is going to feel very distant, that I'm not going to be the person who I was in June and July. And so I developed this exercise where at the beginning of the school year, end of the summer, beginning of the school year, I simply wrote a letter to myself. And it's a letter from my summer self. And I wrote the letter to my middle of the school year self. And the letter is reminding the middle of the school year self of all the things that I forget in the middle of the school year, when the days are short, when the stress is high, when my tank is low. And sometimes I'm just grinding. I'm just putting my head down and I'm just grinding from one day to the next day. And sometimes you need some sort of tool or some sort of strategy for untethering yourself from that limited perspective and seeing kind of the 30,000 foot view of your life again. And so writing a letter from my summer self, it allows me to go to my dresser, pull that out and read it. And it just reminds me of perspectives that I forget about and stop entertaining in the midst of the grind. And so I was sharing that with teachers as my own personal strategy, just one strategy for helping maintain perspective and self-care throughout the school year. And it seemed to resonate. They really liked it. And then to the end of really looking at the fact that as a coach or as a teacher, more than anything, we teach with who we are. And a lot of teachers and coaches want to shy away from that because there's a lot of responsibility there. And in education, we call this co-regulation. Co-regulation is the idea that students' ability to be emotionally regulated is ultimately determined by the teacher's ability to be emotionally regulated. And I use the analogy of the pendulum clock. 400 years ago, Christian Huygens invented the pendulum clock, and he found this anomaly that has perplexed physicists for 4 centuries. And that is, when you put multiple pendulum clocks on the same wall, they'll sync. The pendulum will sync to the same cadence. And I use this as an example for teachers, and I say, you're the master pendulum, the master emotional pendulum of the classroom. And so your emotional pendulum, if it's dysregulated, the 20, the 25 kids who are in that room, they're going to sync their pendulum to the ebbs and flows of your clock as well. And another way of talking about this in terms of research is it's called meta emotions. The emotions we have about the emotions we have. And so as a coach or as a teacher or anyone or as a parent, the way the emotions you have in response to stress are so instructive. And we know this from research, from trauma and from wars, like the London bombings. There was a lot of research done that post-traumatic stress disorder is lower when parents and adults have a favorable emotional response to trauma.
So this is all quite important, I think, for people in any tier of a role, leading, coaching, educating kids or any other group of people. That, especially that analogy, the pendulum clock analogy, while makes it very simple to understand the importance of the coach in this case, understanding self-care. So when we're talking about teachers, adults, and self-care, what do you mean? What do you like? What else is there to it? Is it just being happy and putting out good vibes? I mean, there's a lot to this, right?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Well, if you don't take care of yourself, you are going to be more prone to dysregulation. You're going to be less resilient in the face of stress. If you don't sleep well, if you don't eat well, if you don't move the amount that you should move, if you don't meaningfully socially connect with other people, if you don't on a somewhat regular basis entertain and think about your larger purpose and meaning in your life, all of these things bolster your psychological immune system. And so if you're taking care of yourself, you're going to be more robust in the face of stress because you're going to have more in the tank to deal with that stress. You're not going to be worn down. And this is something our society has completely forgotten about, is that life is engagement and activity. And then life is also recovery. And you need to recover. You need time to rest and down-regulate. And if you're going for 8 hours or 10 hours, well, you need 8 or 10 hours of doing nothing and sleeping well. And I think our culture and our society has mistaken distraction for relaxation. And we think just because we're distracted from our stress, we're somehow filling our bucket back up or our battery back up. And in fact, we're not. We're just further depleting the limited resources that we have. And so people who are in teaching roles and in coaching roles and parenting roles, we're contending with so many different things in our lives. And if we don't take the time to take care of ourselves, then our young adults are not going to do it. If we can't, you can't sit there and tell a student, hey, you got to take care of yourself if you clearly don't take care of yourself.
Right.
And that's, again, it's a little, right. And that's why we teach with who we are. We teach with the decisions we make. That speaks so much more clearly and loudly than any verbal message that we give. So Matt, you're clued in very well to both sides, right? The educator, the coach, the teacher, and then the students, the kids, the athlete. As like, let's say someone like myself, during this time, you know, a lot of stuff is still shelter in place. A lot of things are uncertain. A lot of timelines are uncertain. For my fellow coaches out there, what would you say some of our kind of areas of focus or our priorities or some places that you often see discrepancies is that we can focus on and think about, as not only as you try and take care of yourself to then that translates down, but what should we be looking for additionally is working with these kids right now? Is there any kind of, you know, encouragement or support or how to cut out noise? So from the standpoint of emotional well-being, right? If we look at emotional intelligence as a skill or as the aggregate of a number of skills, the two foundational skills at the heart of emotional intelligence are self-awareness and self-management, the ability to self-manage. And so as an adult who works with kids, you need to think about, am I self-aware? Do I actually understand where my emotional stress level is at moment to moment? And as a result of where my emotional stress level is at, how do I unconsciously react to that? What are my unconscious management strategies? Is it eating? Is it distraction? Is it any number of things? And one of the things we know at the high school level is that if a student reports that they're stressed, the likelihood that they're going to be using drugs and alcohol is significantly higher. Well, why is that? That's because they're attempting to self-manage through drugs and alcohol, right? Right, right. And so as an adult, if you develop self-awareness and then you develop a healthy toolkit, emotional toolkit to self-manage, the research shows that is so instructive to young people, because then they see that stress is something that can be leveraged for growth. And you can't hide how you respond to stress. You can't fake how you respond to stress. Right. Your response doesn't lie, right? And so as an adult, during this quarantine time, be thinking about those two skills. How can you develop your capacity for self-awareness and for self-management? And the number one tool that I use to that end is mindfulness. Mindfulness is a research-based strategy for learning to more acutely be aware of where your stress level is at and what are your instinctive or habitual responses, or I'm sorry, reactions to that, and turn your reactions into a conscious response. Turn unconscious reactions into a conscious response. And your ability to do that will allow you to grow as a person and allow you to thrive in the midst of stress rather than be debilitated by it.
And so mindfulness is really the active tool. It opens the door to the self-awareness and self-management, I'd say. I think sailors are probably better at the discipline and self-management than the self-awareness. So maybe we'll work on that as a group.
Well, it's really hard to successfully self-manage if you lack self-awareness.
So I spoke too soon for my squad. Sorry, guys. Right on. So Matt, I mean, there's just so many takeaways for us. We're running out of time here. So you're talking to my peers, my coaches. We're looking out for all of our youth sailors. We're ready to get back out on the water, but we need to take care of ourselves, take care of them. What are your kind of final thoughts that you'd like to leave us with?
Know what you want. Know what your end is. If you don't know where you're going, nothing else makes sense. Nothing else has context or meaning. It's very hard to live. Everything we know about being emotionally well speaks to a capacity to being deliberate with how you organize your personal resources and time. And if you don't know what your destination is, you're not going to be able to be deliberate with your life. You're going to be reactionary. You're just going to be in the moment and reacting to whatever's happening in your given immediate circumstances. And so, I was watching Discovery Channel a couple years ago, and they were talking about ships at sea, thousands of years ago, hundreds of years ago. And there was this long-standing protocol where they had a flag system that basically represented three different questions. Who are you? Who is your captain? And what is your destination? Where are you going? And when I heard this, I thought this was the most amazing thing I had ever heard. And I used it immediately as a way of, or as questions for self-reflection for my students. Who are you? Right? Where have you come from? What are the experiences that defined the course of your life? As a result of those experiences, who's your captain? Meaning,
who's in charge?
Who's in charge? And are your values at the helm of your ship? Or is fear? Or is stress? Or are your parents and their opinions about how you should live? Which, it's great that parents have their opinions, and parents and coaches and teachers are wonderful assets, but ultimately the point of living is to hand over the helm to the person whose ship it is. And so as a young adult, or even as a coach, be thinking about who's steering your ship, because if your values aren't steering your ship, then where's your fear? Where's your fear is it gonna take you to the destination you ultimately want to go? And where do you want to go? And so be continually considering and reflecting on these questions. Where have I been? Where am I now? What's important to me? And how am I using that to direct where I'm going? That would be the most succinct way I could talk about the total scope of this type of work.
Well, Dr. Dewar, I'm going to direct us to the outro deliberately. Dr. Matt Dewar, thank you so much. Really appreciate it being on Sailors in Suits. And I hope to see you down at the lakefront soon.
Well, it's an honor to be on here with you. This is 15, 16 years in the making, young grasshopper.
That's right. Thank you.